Oh, hi, welcome to Dad's Den of Pop Culture. I'm Dad, and this is my den, and today I want to talk about dads because tomorrow it's Father's Day. And no, I don't smoke a pipe. In fact, I've never smoked anything in my entire life, but it's a great prop. Uh, Today I want to talk about some TV dads that I think most of us know and some of us love, and I want to talk a little bit about what you can learn from these TV dads. Yeah, they're not real. They're not real, but they do they do give us an ideal that we fathers out there can sort of shoot for. Now, I was lucky enough to grow up with a father, and I still have that father. Pretty sure it's the same guy, and and he taught me a lot. For example, he taught me that drugs are something I should avoid, but to be honest, when you take something like that, it makes you feel good at first, but as you become addicted to it, it gets harder and harder and harder to feel good, and as a result, it could really screw up your life. And also, if I ever wanted to do drugs, I could jolly well find myself another place to live. Thanks, Dad. It worked. I stayed off that crap. Point is, a lot of us had fathers that we could look up to, that we could learn from. But there's also a lot of folks out there who grew up without dads. And maybe now they're having children of their own. And they're not exactly sure how to model being a father. Well, I think you could actually find some pretty decent tips by the fellas that I'm going to be looking at today. I'm looking at three dads. We're going to be looking at Ward Cleaver, well known from Leave It to Beaver. We're going to be looking at Stephen Douglas from My Three Sons, and Mike Brady from the Brady Bunch. So let's get into it. Leave It to Beaver was on television from 1957 to 1965, or 63. Never cracked into the Nielsen Top 30. It was never an extremely popular show. Got moved around a lot in the schedule. In fact, it started on CBS and got canceled after a season and moved over to ABC. But it proved to be very popular in syndication. And I don't think it's a mystery why. It's an extremely good TV show. Yeah, it a lot of times gets looked at as being square, and they make fun of the fact that June Cleaver wears pearls when she's working around the house. She wore those pearls because apparently Barbara Billingsley had like a scar on her neck from something that happened in her life, and the pearls helped to hide it. But okay, so maybe maybe it's a little bit uptight, but not as much as people think. Listening to the interactions of the kids, listening to the interactions between Ward and June, it's got a lot of charisma to it. It's one of my favorites, and there's a lot to be said for the character of Ward Cleaver as portrayed by Hugh Beaumont. He's a World War II vet. He's in the Seabees. I think works as an insurance agent, although I'm not sure they ever really established what he did. But he worked in an office, and he had a suit. And he's a pretty, he can be a stern dad, but not overly so. He will often reminisce about the way his father would have handled him had he done the things that Wally and Beaver sometimes did, and that usually involved going out behind the woodshed and getting whooped. And that's not Ward's style at all. He's definitely a guy with a sense of humor, and I like that about him. Stephen Douglas so it was on My Three Sons, played by Fred McMurray. My Three Sons was on television for a long time, 1960 to 1972. You genuinely watch the kids on the show grow up, and you watch as they get married. You watch Robbie have 3 sons of his own. It's pretty extraordinary when a show lasts that long, especially because, as I understand it, Fred MacMurray wasn't really excited about doing the show. He had, by 1960, he had more or less retired from acting. And the idea of doing a weekly show was like, he really just kind of wanted to golf, and relax. But they cajoled him into doing it, and so they actually developed a pretty interesting way of doing the show. They would, at least initially, and maybe this changed over time, they would more or less script the entire season, or maybe large chunks of the season out. And they would set up to film, say, in the kitchen, and they would film all of the scenes that were going to be in the kitchen for maybe that entire season. Do the costume changes, go in there, do all the kitchen scenes, now do all the scenes that are. It was a way that they could do it so that he could compress the filming into a relatively small amount of time, and then have more time to do the things that he really wanted to do. But the show lasted forever. Now, the character of Stephen Douglas is an aeronautical engineer, famous with the pipe, and sort of played as a stoic and thoughtful man. He's a single dad, but he does have the assistance early on of his son's grandfather, who they call Bub, played by William Frawley. When William Frawley wasn't well enough to continue with the role, his brother, Uncle Charlie, took over. It's played by William Demarest. And eventually, Steve Douglas gets married to Barbara Harper, played by the great Beverly Garland. And at that point, a new kid comes into the scene, her daughter, Dodie. But really, really a fantastic example of fatherhood. Finally, we have the Brady Bunch, 1969 to 1974. Yeah, famously kind of goofy, but some really good work by Robert Reed as Mike Brady, the father who marries Carol Martin and adopts her daughters and creates that Brady Bunch. Another military vet. I think he was supposed to have served in the Navy at some point, and he was an architect. So we got some middle class dads. We got some fairly good sized families. Well, maybe not giant families for the time. They're pretty big compared to what most people do nowadays. So what do we learn from these fathers? Why are they something to model your own fatherhood after? I think there's a few lessons that they teach us. One of them is sometimes kids are goofy. Sometimes kids are foolish. They need to be corrected, but they don't need to be punished. These guys, although sometimes not immediately, because just like all dads, they're wrapped up in the things that they have to do on a day-to-day basis, but eventually, they see these things their kids are doing, and they kind of think back to their own childhood, and they kind of realize, what, this is because kids are going to be kids. They're going to be a little bit foolish. They can't really help it. It's who they are. They need to learn. And so these guys, they have that patience, which is really important when you're a father. They have that patience, but they don't mess around. If kids are doing something dangerous, maybe it's because they don't know any better, so you don't need to punish them for doing what they've done. But maybe they need to have some sort of a consequence to those actions to make darn sure they don't do it again. So they're patient, but they discipline when discipline is needed, and they stick to their guns. And that's important with kids. Kids need to see that they have those boundaries, that they have those lines they're not allowed to cross. They need to know these things if they're going to make it. But I think the other thing that these guys bring to the table, and this is something I definitely dealt with myself as a father. You start out in fatherhood, you got a baby that you're dealing with. I mean, generally, unless you're adopting an older child, but most of us start out with a baby. Now, babies can't reason, they can't even talk, they don't know what you're saying. And so that's like your life for a it's actually a really short period of time, but it feels like a really long period of time while you're doing it. And so you're changing diapers and you're doing the feeding, this, and you're just doing that stuff, and you get used to that. And at a certain point, you start realizing that this kid is thinking, and this kid understands you, and this kid is talking, and this kid gets mobile. And so all of a sudden, this paradigm of having an infant in the house gets switched to having a fully functioning human in the house. And at some point, no matter how good they are, and my kid she was pretty good, they're going to do something wrong. They're going to do something that's going to require some kind of correction. How do you do that? I faced that moment in my life at one point. And the first time, I kind of blew my top. It involved some extensive coloring on kitchen cabinets, and it was bad. And so, I mean, I didn't throw a major fit, but I was pretty stern. But she was young enough that she didn't really get it. She didn't really pick up on the whole "I'm angry" thing. And so clearly that wasn't going to be very useful. As she got a little older, I thought back to those moments in these TV sitcoms. And what do these guys do when the kid has done something wrong? They don't shout, they don't scream, they don't curse, they don't start hitting them. They sit them down and they talk to them. And so I made a conscious decision to do that, and I think it worked out pretty well with my kid. So why? If your child is behaving essentially out of fear, a fear of you blowing up, hopefully not fear of being, beaten, although we all know there are times when they're very little, a little swat on the butt is a good attention getter. But if it's all about fear, then what they're really learning is, a little bit of resentment for authority, but also the idea that if nobody's looking, I can do what I want. If I can get away with it, I'm okay. I just don't want somebody to blow up at me. I don't want Dad to blow up and ground me. I don't want the police officer to see me and arrest me. But what they're not getting is any kind of moral or ethical foundation for their life. When you sit and when you talk is when you can start instilling principles in your children. Now we can probably, if you watch Brady Bunch, you'll see Brady do this many times. Sit the boys or the girls down and explain to them what they've done wrong, why what they've done is wrong, and try to make them understand that they need to not do that again. And that's what I really tried to do with my daughter. Stephen Douglas, the same thing. And sometimes that shows like a master class. Because with him, he would so often, he'd let his sons he'd give them the freedom. You're going to do what you're going to do. You know, at a certain point, they're old enough. It's very difficult to stop them. You're going to do what you're going to do. But you need to think long and hard about what you're doing. You need to think about how it's affecting other people. You know, the kids might have gotten roped into something, you know, with a girl who's not cool, and I don't want to be seen with her. Come on, you know. And with Steve, he'd say, hey, I'm not going to make you go out with this girl. I'm not going to force you to do that. But you need to think about what you're doing to her and what kind of person you are for doing it. You know, and it helped these kids to see the higher principles involved. That it's not just all about you and what you want right now. It's about bigger things. And it's about becoming a bigger person and growing. He was fantastic at that. I'd almost say if there's only one show you're going to watch to train for fatherhood, it's My Three Sons. You got to catch an episode where he's not on a business trip. Because like I said, Fred McMurray liked to golf. But when he was there, fantastic way of handling his sons and actually molding them into being good human beings. And you get to see it with Robbie as he gets older and suddenly is married and has to start dealing with that. And he and his wife, they're young and they both need help, and he's there for them. And as they have sons of their own, you know, and are encountering these kind of problems, you can see the lessons that he learned, you know, being applied. And then we have Ward, who was, you know, cursed with whoops. Come on, Ward. There we go. We have Ward, who had to deal with the likes of Beaver, and with the likes of Eddie Haskell and Lumpy Rutherford and their influence on Wally. And Ward's a little more stern. Like I said, Ward grew up on a farm. He had a father who, you know, took him to the woodshed when he had to. And, you know, this is one of these kind of early shows where you're seeing what you might call the new kind of parenting. It's not about beating the crap out of your kids until they stop. Which I'm sad to say, some of that's still out there. Although oftentimes now it's just shouting at your kids until they stop. But it was more about let's actually try to build these young minds and make them into the kind of people that we want them to be and that society needs them to be. And so he and June work on that thing, and they sit and they talk and they listen to their children, because it shouldn't just be a lecture. You need to see where they're coming from. That's how you gauge what they understand and what they're going through. And maybe you find out, all right, it seemed pretty cut and dry to me, but now I understand why it wasn't so cut and dry to them. And, you know, you'll see why, you know, like Beaver, why didn't you tell me this was going on? Well, I was afraid, you know, Dad, you'd get mad at me. And you, well, why do you think I'd get mad at me? Well, you're mad at me now. Oh, geez, you know, he's right. It's about building these ties between father and children. You need to be a teacher, and you need to be a guide, and you need to be a protector, you know. And the nice thing about being a dad is sometimes you also get to be a pal. You get to have fun with the kids, you know. You get to be the one who says, hey, let's stop and get an ice cream. Don't tell your mother, you know. You have those kind of things that you can do that help draw you closer to them. They need to trust you, and you need to be trustworthy. And that's key. And if you do that, you're going to have kids who have some principles, who are not afraid to ask for advice and help, and who therefore have a much better chance of going out into the world and doing well and dealing with the problems that they're going to find. And believe it or not, you can learn a lot of these things from television. Now, these aren't the only, you know, great TV dads from the past, but I think they're three of the best. And if you haven't watched these shows, give them a look. They're not quite as square as you might think. You know, maybe Mike Brady is actually, strangely enough, a little squarer than the other two in certain ways, but they're not as square as you think, and they're actually very well written comedies. They all lasted for a long time. Um, if you grew up in Gen X, you have probably a lot of great memories of these shows. Um, that have carried forward. They're a little corny, they're a little goofy, but they're worth watching. And if you are a young man who's embarking on being a father, and you want to see some of the best, you want to learn from some of the best, Ward Cleaver, Stephen Douglas, Mike Brady, these guys can help guide you. Because, hey, let's be honest, fathers, we need guidance too. So, hey, all you dads out there, I hope you have a happy Father's Day. Kids, give dad a break for a day, Be nice to him. Give your dad a call. If you're lucky enough, if your dad is still alive, give him a call. Maybe if you didn't have the best relationship or you had some problems, maybe try to reconnect. I know in some cases that's not a good idea. Sometimes these relationships can be very bad, but dad's human too. Dad's human too. We make mistakes. A little forgiveness, maybe try to connect. It might be good for you. In the meantime, I hope that if you enjoyed this video, that you'll give it a thumbs up. Maybe think about subscribing. That helps me out on this channel of mine. If you have some memories of dad, or you have some memories of these TV shows, or maybe you have a favorite TV dad that I didn't talk about here, maybe with some life lessons, some little bits of wisdom, leave it in the comments. I'd love to hear from you. I hope you have a great day. Go out there and be kind to one another, and I will see you again soon on Dad's Den of Pop Culture.